Hi, everyone. So, today we're going to talk about how Europe changed after the Crusades. So, specifically, today we're going to talk about two topics: the Commercial Revolution and the Black Death. Whoops. So, Europe changed politically, economically, and socially. The Crusades really opened Europeans' eyes to the rest of the world, and they now wanted to be a part of that bigger world. Okay, so quick timeline of events. So, we're going to go way back in time. I wish we could actually look at the timeline together in the classroom, but we can't. So, after the fall of Rome, we know that the Byzantine Empire survives. But in Western Europe, there was a different thing that happened. So, after the fall of Rome, we went into that feudal period where everybody lived on a manor and they were self sufficient and they were isolated from the rest of the world. And then the Crusades occurred, and the Crusades opened Europeans' eyes to actually the Islamic world, which was having a golden age at the time. If we remember, the Abbasid dynasty created all of those amazing innovations and inventions, the House of Wisdom, algebra, the astrolabe. And so after the Crusades ended, a lot of those ideas and goods came home to Europe. And so people became really interested in trading. Merchants started again, and we're leaving the manor. We're not self sufficient anymore. We live in towns and we rely on each other for goods and services. So that's the commercial revolution. When you bring in lots of trade goods, unfortunately, one of the downsides of that is it can bring in disease. And ultimately, that's what occurs in Europe, is that the Black Plague hits Europe and it devastates the population. But once the plague subsides, what we see is this celebration of life. People are interested in kind of looking at the world in a new way. And that's when we see the Renaissance begin, which is this rebirth of ideas. One of the most important inventions to come out of this Renaissance, this time of rebirth and learning, is the printing press. Okay, so what we're talking about this week is kind of the trajectory of these events from what happened after the Crusades. Okay, so what was the commercial revolution? Well, commerce or commercial refers to business. So the commercial revolution really was an increase in trade and the fact that businesses really started to pick up in Europe. And as a result, we see cities grow inside, serfs leave the manor and move into towns and cities. Merchants are really important. They're bringing goods from the different places around the world. They're going trading on the Mediterranean and getting goods from the Middle East, and then even from the Indian Ocean, they're being brought into the Middle East. And then from the Middle East, the European traders are bringing it across the Mediterranean Sea into Italy and then further into Europe. When serfs returned from the Crusades, many of them went straight into towns to learn a new skilled job and left the farm behind. So say bye-bye to the manor. This is not the life for me anymore. I'm moving into town and I'm learning to become a cobbler or a maker of shoes. All right, so how did it change Europe? Some of the biggest ways the commercial rev changed Europe was that the increase in trade actually increased the power of merchants and then in turn kings, because kings could tax those merchants. And as a result, the kings got more powerful and they got more wealth, and they didn't really need to rely on the nobles in the same way they used to. So feudalism is disappearing. More trade meant more cash, which meant that banking became important and people started to borrow money to build businesses. And lastly, more workers were needed to make things like shoes and clothes and goods like that. So a lot of serfs, this was their chance to leave the manor behind and actually even get paid for labor. Because remember, a serf wasn't paid for working the farm, but if they moved into town, they could actually get paid to make a good. With all that increase in trade, what ended up happening was the bubonic plague, or the Black Death, showed up in Europe. So what was the Black Death? The Black Death actually was from fleas and rats. So there was this bacteria inside the rat's blood called Yersinia pestis. And when the flea would bite the rat, he would get infected with that Yersinia pestis. And then at this time, many people did not have good hygiene. And so what would happen is those fleas would jump onto humans and bite the human. And now a human was infected. Okay, so where we left off, we were talking about the Black Death and the fact that once the fleas jumped off the rats and onto humans, then humans could spread the Black Death from one to another. And so it began to spread, especially because there was very bad hygiene at the time and people did not take very good care of themselves. There wasn't modern medicine there, and in Europe there really weren't even that many hospitals. Most medical care happened at home with your family. So as a result, the Black Death took a big toll on Europe's population. So the places that traded the most were the ones that saw it first. So what happened was the Mongols were really responsible for bringing this westward. Thanks to the Pax Mongolica, trade had picked up. So it was first seen in the city of Kafka. And then from there, merchants brought it down to the city of Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire. That's a big trading center. And then from there, it spread on the ships and first showed up in Italy. And then from Italy, spread further and further north. Right. So as people continued to trade, we saw that the plague hit further and further into Europe. So how did the Black Death change Europe? It changed Europe in three ways. Politically, once again, kings gained more power as some of the population died, and landowners had to actually kind of negotiate with peasants more as to whether or not they were going to farm the land for the Lord. The king consolidated his land back and took some back from the lords and then resold some of that to merchants, and then it could be taxed to create new cities and towns. And like I had said, landowners were losing power over the peasants because there were fewer people. Those people got to kind of negotiate better terms as far as working the land. So economically, farming and production went down at first because there were less people. But the people who survived could demand higher wages. Those are our serfs who could say now, I want to be paid more, which caused prices to rise as well. Socially, the population decreased in Europe. Peasants revolted against the idea of serfdom. We kind of see that the manor really is dead at this point. People are no longer really living on the manor. The Lord has a really hard time having power over serfs as a result. People begin, those who survive, to celebrate life and really begin to question the church. So the church is now, they told them if they prayed, they'd win the Crusades, and then they didn't. And now the church said if they prayed, the Black Death wouldn't hit, but it did. So people begin to look for answers elsewhere outside of the church, right? So that's how Europe changed over time. If we look at these two images, so before the plague, right, here is our noble or our lord, and I need 2 men to plow the field of my manor. How much do I need to pay you? So all of these guys are offering to do the work, and these two people get the job because they say, all I want is food. If you give me food, then I will work for you. Before the plague, high population led to a lot of competition for jobs, which meant employers could pay workers less or not at all. However, afterward, there were fewer people, and therefore the serfs had more power. They could ask for more pay. All right, so problems caused by the plagues. Many of the peasants who once farmed the land had died, and peasants wanted more money to work. They farmed less land. They start growing other things that aren't labor intensive, and they pay the peasants in actual wages now. In long-term effects, peasants gain more power, right? Lords could no longer control their lives. And over the next 200 years, as a result of the plague, feudalism disappears from Europe. Okay, so that is some of the changes that occurred after the Crusades. The commercial revolution, increase in business, that increase in trade brings plague to Europe. And then in our next lesson, we'll talk about the other change, the social changes that occur in the Renaissance. All right.